Що ж, ми сьогодні розпочинаємо останній день M17 International Practice Forum. І сьогодні в нас насичена програма. Передбачено понад 4 виступи і прямі конференції з нашими спікерами. Тому я можу зараз оголосити та представити нашого першого спікера Alistair Hicks. Alistair – це експерт, письменник, куратор. Протягом 20 років був старшим куратором колекції Deutsche, однієї з найзначніших у світі корпоративних колекцій. Взагалі ця колекція нараховує приблизно на сьогоднішній день більше 55 тисяч одиниць. Це одна з найбільших корпоративних колекцій світу. Алістер, він дослідник і, до речі, у мене є зараз на столі у нас 2 книг. Я так розумію. Collections in 21st century art. Алістер письменник і взагалі всі свої знання, дослідження, досвід з зарубіжними художниками, пов'язані з колекцією Deutsche Bank, і він відразив в книжці, в своїх публікаціях. І я б хотіла сказати, що він також є арт-кореспондент для видання The Times, The Financial Times, Whole Magazine, Peace Magazine, The Spectator, Vogue. Тобто у нас є нагода поспілкуватися з людиною, яка дуже добре орієнтується в трендах сучасного мистецтва світу і розуміється на колекціонуванні. Тож я даю слово Алістару, і темою його презентації буде корпоративне колекціонування Deutsche Bank Case Study. Формат наступний. Алістар розповідає, і далі у нас можливість задавати питання і спілкуватися безпосередньо з нашим гостем.
Alistair, so now I go to the, I made an introduction. Please, it's your time to give us, more information about your experience of working with Deutsche Bank collection. Case study. Yeah.
Okay, well, it's very nice to be with you there in Ukraine. I actually left working for Deutsche Bank 5 years ago. So by giving a case study of my experience at Deutsche Bank, it is already an historical case study. And I think that's very appropriate at the moment because the recent events of the last couple of years will change the way people work in the workplace very dramatically. And so that any future collections and corporate collections will be relying much more on the fluid and volatile way that we work and go to work. And so they will rely more on digital. And, but I think that it is very interesting that we, in a way, the pandemic has just put on a spotlight on all the things that we were doing wrong. And it's exaggerated what was going wrong. And the great thing about art, and I've always treated art as a person or just someone living in amongst us, is that it can give a sense of belonging or make you understand your own sense of belonging. And so if we, in the future, we have a more versatile, more volatile way of working, and we're working sometimes from home, sometimes in different offices, I think art can play a very crucial role here. In fact, it will become more important. So when I start my slides, I've got some slides to show you. I'm going to actually start with the last project I did for them about, well, it was finished after I left, so it was finished about 3 years ago. But I would love to engage afterwards with questions about how people think art can work in the workplace. But to be honest, I don't see the workplace and elsewhere as that different. I think what this pandemic has shown is that we're not using artists and art enough, and art is just an extension of life, and it's not up on a pedestal. It should just be an integral part of our life. So I'm going to now try and share my screen so that I can start showing slides. So as I say, I wanted to start with the last project I did. And that came out of the move of some 5,000 people from Deutsche Bank who were going to move 20 minutes away down to Canary Wharf, a great big tall building in Canary Wharf. This move was pretty unpopular with staff. They weren't very happy about being moved to a more remote spot, although the views are sensational. And so we decided that we've got to do something quite dramatic. Deutsche Bank had 16 floors of this Canary Wharf building. And so I approached an artist from India called Sarnath Banerjee. And Sarnath and I concocted an idea that we would turn the 16 floors of this building, we would treat it as though it was a book. The whole book. Sarnath is famous for making graphic art, for making what we might call comic books. And his work has always got a sort of slightly satirical side to it, and he's very involved. And what really impressed me, after we decided we would turn the 16 floors into 16 chapters. Each floor would be a chapter, and you'd come into when you got out of the lift, you would see a little storyboard about that chapter, and then you would see works like the one here. This one actually shows Charles Darwin. Now, one side of Sarnath's work was very much his normal practice. So he wanted to get involved with the stories about London, about that area, how to try and engage people, because in a way, the trouble about working in an office is you can be stuck in the ivory tower. And the Deutsche Bank's art concept was very much devised to break down the ivory tower mentality, to try and get the ideas of the communities of where they're living into the buildings and stop people feeling isolated from their environment. Because I think the modern idea of corporate social policies is that really anyone working in an area is just part of the community, and you don't want to create any borders or barriers, despite the security ones, of course. Now, so Sarnath went around collecting stories, and one of them was about Darwin. But at the same time, he said, it's absolutely essential that I meet the people in the bank, the people who are going to go there, because I want to know and share their concerns about. So we arranged a couple of visits where we toured around people who were going to be working in these buildings. And this was sort of two years ahead of time. And I'd, by that stage, been working for 18 years for Deutsche Bank. And my trouble when I with a big bank like Deutsche Bank, people do such different jobs. And when I used to ask people what they'd do, because they assumed I was part of the organization, and they replied in these acronyms, and it was really quite complicated. The wonderful thing is Sarnath, going around with Sarnath, I really began to understand what people did. And they revealed their dreams, their aspirations. And the greatest thing and the most surprising thing was how quite a lot, most of them showed how much pride they had in their jobs and how much involvement and what they wanted to do. And so the artist, in a way, was able to get out far more understanding of what people thought was happening in their environment, what was going wrong. And so that, for me, that was just a wonderful experience. And there's another one from that process. Right.
So we are going to presentation, right?
Aren't you in the presentation?
No, you need to share.
I did share it. Oh dear. Okay, right. I'll come in. I thought we were sharing.
Okay.
So sorry. You see it now?
Yes. Yes. Can you? Yeah, just full screen, right? Mm-hmm.
So sorry. I thought this is what you should have been seeing. That's Charles Darwin. And that was put on by wallpaper, and then you saw all that was going on behind. There's just an office, and then here he's working away under this opium eater behind him. Right, I'm sorry about that. I thought you had nice pictures to see rather than me just droning on like that. So I'm going to start. There are the original Deutsche Bank cars. And the original Deutsche Bank concept really came about the same time that the bank acquired these in the 80s. So Deutsche Bank was thinking about how they could use art back then in the late 70s and the beginning of the 80s. And the first showing of art in these towers, what did become the sort of signature tune, because here they had two great big ivory towers sitting in the middle of Frankfurt. And they're thinking, how can we use these to involve art to make them more human? And the simple answer is shown by these, because what they decided to do, 60 of the floors after German artists. So if you can see close enough, the names of artists. So there are two towers, Towers A and Tower B, and the top of one tower was Horst Antis, and the top of another tower was Joseph Beuys. And so in a way, you've got the shortest attempt at contemporary art history ever, because they tried basically that linear line. As you went down the building, the artists got younger and younger. So the eldest artist there was Horst Antis and Joseph Beuys, and they went down to artists who were born in the 50s. Now, probably the major work, the biggest work I did for Deutsche Bank in the 18 years I was there was helping turn up that initial scheme, because in the mid-80s, Deutsche Bank was a German bank in a European context a bit, but that they decided to celebrate German-speaking. So there were no other representatives. By 2008, the year they started trying to turn those towers into what became the most ecological buildings, high-rise buildings of the time. By that time, Deutsche Bank was an international bank. So over the years, at that time, the collection consisted of 60,000 works, and it was in 965 buildings around the world in 45 different countries. So it was slightly ridiculous having a headquarters that was just about German art. So we decided to rename all the floors after artists from around the world. And it was interesting in a way, because global surveys of what was going on around the place were very few and far between. And so luckily I got the job of really trying to help and try to find out who we should name these floors after, find work, and to then put it into some order. So we basically we decided that we would we started choosing artists from around the world. We forgot about we deliberately went away from the lift buttons as well. And the reason was that, in a way, we didn't want to be associated with linear art history and the way that was presented. And so actually, if you go into the headquarters at Deutsche Bank, there is a bank of screens, lots and lots of screens, and flashing up at different artists and their work. You see their picture and works by them, and you can press a name or the floor that you're going to, and it will tell you about the artists you're going to and where you're going. So even back then in 2008 to 2011, when it was finally open, you can see how the change in technology was helping in explaining where you were going. The art was becoming like a signpost, and helping you do that. I should, just before I start looking at the individual floors, I should say a little bit about the concept, the original concept. So, as I said, it was really designed to try and get over the ivory tower mentality. And at that time, in the 60s and 70s, the dominant people in corporate collecting were Americans. And the main pioneer was the Rockefellers at the Chase Bank. But in a way, that was just an extension of big, splashy spending. And so Mr. Rockefeller took the 4 top curators in America from the museums, and you can see them all sitting around and being told what to do by her. And they did buy amazing art, big sport, but Deutsche Bank decided that they didn't want to just use the process as showing off. They said, Deutsche Bank is not in the business of, we're not in the business of the art business. But we would like to make culture a small but integral part of our DNA. And this is much more natural than having, say, big bosses choosing what we want. The whole idea was aimed at people who are using the buildings, both customers and clients, but as well the staff, and to get them. So the idea of putting big, expensive work into the office was a bit off-putting. So we decided that we wanted to buy works that most of the people coming into the office, if they wanted to buy similar things, that they could afford it. And the way so that was one reason why we decided to buy, instead of big canvases, etc., to buy works on paper. And so the other advantage of works on paper is actually artists do always work through their ideas, or often work through their ideas on paper or some form of a drawing. And the concept is very idea-based. The idea of getting ideas around and letting people be involved with the ideas of that time. So those were the main precepts. So the average price of works that we were buying in the 70s, 80s, 90s, even the beginning of this century, was about $1,500 per work. So remarkably cheap, really. And we did, at the time, break our rules to have big, splashy, expensive work in the lounges, in the reception areas, etc., because small works of art wouldn't probably work there. Okay, so I'm going to move on to the different floors. So, as I say, 60 floors in Frankfurt named after artists from around the world. Now, this is Sao Fei, a Chinese artist who now is ranked in the par 100 of the art. She's ranked as number 6 as the most influential. Anyway, Sao Fei had already worked for a company in her own province, which is Guangzhou, in her own city, Guangzhou, and she was working in for a factory, a Siemens factory outside, and they asked her to come and work as artist in residence there. And she came across this, the fact that most of the people working there were in their 20s in this particular factory. Most of them weren't actually connected to the area in which they were working. So they were living in small bedsits and most of them were not particularly motivated by the company's motivational tools. I mean, when I was at Deutsche Bank, we had a slogan which was passion to perform. Well, it's not exactly the most, not likely that many people wake up in the morning and think, gosh, I've got to have passion to perform. So she decided that she would work with people's individuals' slogans, individuals' dreams. And she would make films about it. So this particular lady here, her dream was that she wanted to dance through the factory floor wearing a dress with peacock feathers in it. So here she is dancing. It was a 20-minute film of her, all about the performance and how it comes up. So San Fei is a very interesting artist in that she is probably one of the most interesting artworks with the internet, and she did it back at the beginning of this century when she was a very young artist. And I showed this in a museum show in Istanbul just recently, and already the technical side of it was outdated. So I was showing a project she'd done in 2007 to 2011, and I was showing it really as almost like archive material. But basically, it's interesting that given that the internet is censored in China, that a Chinese artist should come up with one of the most interesting internet artworks. And basically, she created this city, RMB City, which is a virtual city on Second Life. And you were able to come, one of her collectors, Uli Zig, who has the biggest, one of the biggest collections of Chinese art outside China, was the Swiss ambassador. He became mayor of the city. He bought, and you could buy property. And it also worked like a sort of social network. So you created your avatar and you came on. This particular image I'm showing is of a ballet that she actually got performed in reality and in virtual life. So she was very much a pioneer of using technology to relate to be. There's an extraordinary work. She also was BMW's Artist of the Year, and she made a BMW car, and she made a wonderful film about this man and his dreams of driving a car, and how he was, in a way, like had the same spirituality of a monk. And she once lit up the whole of one of Hong Kong's high-rise buildings with cartoon characters performing all the way up. Right, a very different artist here who we named a floor after. It's quite interesting, a lot of the subjects of the artists that we were choosing in 2008, and now that's quite a long time away, have become very topical. So Anne Sala from Albania, sorry, this is Adrian Pace from Albania. We also have a floor to Anne Sala, but Adrian Pace made a series of work about emigration. And this image from this film, I think, really illustrates the point. All these people wanting to leave, they're at an airport and they're just stuck, they're isolated there. And it is a amazing story. I think it's in using artists to put images on the wall of the offices does mean that you can get very serious questions and debates, and people get very involved in what's going on. Now, and we used, as well as digital and technical, high-tech ways of involving people, Nedko Solikov, a Bulgarian artist, used a very basic tool to get in touch with the people of the 23rd floor in Frankfurt, in that he went out and bought wallpaper from Frankfurt. So he found an old wallpaper and he papered a lot of the wall there. And the idea was he wanted people to make them feel that it was their place. So he wrote little graffiti. So there's little, and also a lot of his work is about making the fact that people who feels that they're being made small by the system can have their own place. And so this is illustrated here. And he shows a small man with a big idea in his head. And there are places on that floor where he actually encourages you to go and make your own comments on the wallpaper. He's actually quite a, although he's famous for drawings and installations like this with small drawings, he's actually a very highly conceptual artist and has done lots of things which are very abstract. In one way, he made a work which was described by one creator as Malevich on speed. And basically, you see a whole room, and then suddenly there's a painter coming and painting it black. And when the painter has nearly finished that, you see another painter painting it white. And that, it shows the impermanence of everything and the impossibility of any one idea totally prevailing. This was another rather very brave work he did when Bulgaria became independent. He produced this file as a work of sculpture. And apparently the file is exactly the same as the secret police had in Bulgaria. It's exactly the same format. And he created his own file. And this is just as Bulgaria got independence. And inside those file cards actually make reports about young Nedko, about him. And they show how he was a collaborator with the police as a young boy. Now, how much is fiction and how much is reality is left to our imagination. But to do that at that time is quite extraordinary. Now, here's another artist who used wallpaper, the Indian artist, Dayanita Singh. And sorry about the standard of the slide, which is pretty useless. But Dayanita, again, she'd actually started using wallpaper in her museum shows. So she made her photograph. Previously, she'd been known for making these serious black and white photographs of families all around India that were giving us sort of a snapshot And then she started building these libraries of images. But this is taken from, I think it's called the Indian Highway, and it's from one of the the highest buildings in hotels in Delhi. So, an artist from the African continent, and this is by Samuel Fosso. I love this picture, and in a way, Samuel Fosso was doing very much what Cindy Sherman has done throughout her career, and he actually started earlier. I mean, they didn't know about each other, but he started way back. Interestingly, his life started. He had to start earning a living when he was in his teenage, because most of his family were killed in the Nigeria-Biafra war, and he managed to flee to the Bangu, the Central Republic, and there he managed to get a job working with a photographer who made wedding photographs, etc. And within a few years, he actually took over that business. And so if you would go to Bangu, people thought of him as the local photographer for the area to make all the ceremonies, etc. But with the spare films he had, originally, his grandmother lived back in Nigeria, and to show he was still alive, he would send pictures of himself to her. Not all of them, I think, were exactly the normal sort of things you would send your grandmother, because some of them were practically naked. And as he said, well, I was also trying to show what a good-looking man I was. So he's made his works out of showing himself, and then acting out different people. So he did a whole series on African heroes, and then he did a slight mock-up of that, where he pretended to be Chairman Mao. And because of the current colonial relationship between China and Africa, and how they're buying up so much of Africa, he showed himself as a black man as Chairman Mao. Here, he's actually attacking African involvement in the whole colonial process. So this is the African chief, the chief sold the slaves to the colonialists. That's its title. And there he is enjoying all the luxuries of the slave trade, as it were. But it's a great image. Right, this is an American artist called Raymond Peterman, who's one of the oldest ones in the new office. And Raymond actually is half Estonian, and nobody knew that he was half Estonian. Indeed, I didn't until a Deutsche Bank sponsored Frieze Art Fair. And suddenly while the Frieze Art Fair was going on, there was so much traffic in New York that I got a message from an Estonian gallerist who was a friend of mine saying, can you help us? Our Minister of Culture has arrived at Frieze, and none of us have got there. Can you look after him? And so I gave him a tour around Frieze. I stopped in front of Raymond Peterman and was talking about him. And the assistant said, you do realize Raymond Peterman is half Estonian. And I said, no, in that case, we should do a show in Estonia. So I created a show of Peterman at Kumu in Estonia. And one of the interesting things was he had an uncle who was still alive in his 90s. And his uncle had fought for 3 different nations during the war. But because he'd fought against the Russians for the Finns, when he got back, the Russians, Stalin locked him up, and he was in a gulag for 11 years. And Raymond had always heard stories about him, but the uncle had actually written a book, but it was only in Estonian. So my first job as a curator was actually to get it translated for him. Now, I'm not going to, Natalia, perhaps you can help me here, because this is a Ukrainian artist. And I know I will mispronounce her if I say her name. She's called Lada, which I can manage, but it's like Nakonechia. Anyway.
Лада наконечно, да.
Like that. They're lovely. Anyway, I bought some of her work for the Moscow office because what I love about these drawings is she makes wonderful fun of the art market and the power of the art market at increasing prices. And this series of works, she went around the world doing these rather traditional drawings and prints, little drawings of prints of the country. And then at the bottom of the written underneath, she would work out the value of the work by saying the average worker in Ukraine earns X per hour. This drawing took me seven hours, so this is the cost. Of course, if she did it in Switzerland, it was a lot more expensive, or New York. And so it sort of shows the absurdity of how far removed the art market is, not only from most people's lives, but also from most artists' lives. Oops, sorry. And this is, I'm very keen on Russian artists. I included this work in an exhibition I did in Turkey called Double Vision. And I just, again, it shows the division, how the art world is not a single place, or artists around the world are actually reflecting. So because Yuri Albert, who is this artist who made this, lives in Germany and in Russia, he's not that well known, and it's just making, in a way, the blonde lady is rather like the art world, but he's now this is a young artist from Pakistan called Wakis Khan, and I show this picture. You can't really understand why he's well known, except he's big, handsome man. But when that work is just made with a small pen, and why I think he's a very interesting artist is that it's all about, it's literally like writing, but there's no writing, there's no text. And a lot of abstract art is really about following the process. And it's emotional. In the Twin Towers in the reception, we put this work by Gabriel Orozco, which I think is an intriguing work, because Orozco was a Mexican artist, and this shows a famous athlete who's well known as a decathlete. She does 10 different sports, and so it's an all-rounder like the original Olympic piece. And it shows her with a shot, like a round. And most of Orozco's work has circles in it. And he's basically questioning where is the center. So living in Mexico City, which arguably, in my book, The Global Art Compass, which Natalia's kindly held up for you, I actually say, arguably, the intellectual center of the Americas is Mexico City rather than New York City. But it's just that the money and everything has come from New York. And so artists have flocked, including actually eventually Orozco when he was bringing up his children. But the answer is, where is the actual center? He's questioning with a circle, you know, what goes on? Is it the periphery that's important or the center? Now, one of my dreams when I was working for Deutsche Bank was that one could create a really exciting trading floor. This is a trading floor in London back 15 years ago, and I've ended up putting a big Gillionaire's works there. But in a way, even back then, I was looking for technical ways that one could involve a space, because you had 500 people in a room. Most of them have between 4 to 8 screens in front of them, 4 to 10 screens in front of them. And sorry, this is an old picture. And it is a wonderful place. But the trouble was, and it is an interesting problem when you come to do work, if the art department is not as important as the technical department can bully. They were terribly worried that if we did anything technical in there, the information coming out about the markets would be sidetracked. But there is still enormous room to do work with that is more all cohesive and getting people involved. Because, when you have 500 people working in one room, it's nice to give them something that is a little bit different and a bit human. Matilda Tahaina is, again, we did a reception with her work, and it looks really quite commonplace, lots of racks of postcards. Then you're encouraged to take them, you look at them, and they're images of unknown women. And then you look on the back, and it has a little description about them. Great pioneers, about 500 women pioneers, including, say, 43 Nobel Prize winners, etc. The first woman who wore trousers. But then you see that there's a dysfunction between the front and the back, and that actually the women are unknown, and it's really about the marginalization of women. Now, this is by Rax Media Collective, and it shows how they change a clock into about emotions. And we used it again in a reception, and we used it at Frieze Art Fair. Now I'm going to end with talk about Anish Kapoor. So we used this work by Anish Kapoor, and we've worked with Anish Kapoor in lots of different ways. And I just wanted to end by talking about how you can work with artists in lots of different ways. So we actually bought this work, which is called Turning the World Upside Down. And you come up and stand in front of it and you're upside down. And it's a very good way of showing that people are open to new ideas of seeing things in a new way. It's actually a 2.5 ton steel silver ball. But we also, when we did Frieze, we sponsored an exhibition at the Architects Museum at the Frieze, and we did an exhibition where he showed his 45 large architectural works that he'd done, but he showed the models. So I can claim to have done the largest work or curated the largest exhibition of Anish Kapoor, but actually the largest model was only about 3 or 4 meters big, and most of them much smaller. But he did make this beautiful catalogue to go with it, which Deutsche Bank paid for. Then for the Deutsche Guggenheim, which is a collaboration between Deutsche Bank and Guggenheim, he made a massive work called Memory. And the whole point is that he literally blocked the Frank Lloyd Wright building in New York by putting this massive thing. So you can't actually ever see all sides of the work because you have to go round through another door to see the other side. And actually, his point is that you can never see a work of sculpture in the total round. You have to walk and move. And it's, in a way, it's a comment about how much can we see, what do we perceive, etc. Now, I'm going to end with a work that wasn't made for Deutsche Bank, but just to show how an artist can actually even brand a whole city. So for the Millennium Project for Chicago, he made this work that has become like an icon of the city. It's called the bean. It looks like a great big broad bean. And it's actually officially called the cloudscape. But it's interesting how it's been adopted, like our silver ball was adopted as a meeting place. This is a meeting place in Chicago and shows again the reflected sky, but also the potential of a city. So I'm going to stop talking immediately now and hand over for questions, if that's okay, Natalie.
Thank you, dear Alistair. It looked like we actually were on offline tour in Deutsche Bank. No, not a virtual one, but it looked like we just followed you, saw by each floor to see all the collection.
Good.
My question is that taking into account that you were working for a long time for a corporate collection, a bank collection. And in Ukraine, we many times had a situation when the corporate collection is actually connected with the person of the owner, usually of the owner. So for instance, in Ukraine, we used to have probably many cases when the bank had a very good collection, but then it became bankrupt. And we had the collection was not lost, but it lost for the public actually. So right now we know from the financial situation of actually of the whole world, financial crisis, we know that there are some decreases, you know, in budgets, probably of Deutsche Bank as well. And probably your collection is also suffering somehow, yes? So could you tell us how the bank tried to manage this kind of crisis? And I know that some of the works were sold. Was it a good investment for the bank?
Yeah, I mean, Deutsche Bank, I think, were very clever in that they said, we're not doing this for investment. It's as I say, part of corporate social responsibility, and it's to make people understand the world better and get involved. So one should really not judge it in financial terms. Having said that, you know, before I got there, my German colleagues had already bought 300 works by Richter and Baselitz and various things like that, which would pay for every single penny that they've spent on the art over. And you're right, I think they probably have sold one or two, but they haven't, I mean, the vast majority. But I think what I think is very exciting is that they thought of it as a way to show that they were more than just about money as a bank, and that it was a way to show that they were involved in change. Now, I think it's wrong for people to look at collections, and it's the art market, of which I'm part in some way, that has been responsible for giving this idea that art is about money, and the branding of artists becomes so important. But okay, it can be a very important part of it. But what art is often showing is how fast the world is changing. And now, if you carry on my analogy of thinking about art and etc. as like treating them like human beings, if you think, how many marriages, how long does the average marriage last? In Britain, I think it's 11 years, which is also the average length of a collection. So of all, I'm not just saying corporate collections, but all collections. Collection is not usually permanent. I mean, museums have spent this idea of and you can create great permanent collections, but museums, as you know, are having a very tough time now. And one of the projects I'm involved in is trying to make sure that people engage with museums 24 hours a day, rather than come to them rather like they go to the zoo once a year or whatever. And I think change, I mean, if you've built up a good collection and it gets dispersed, at least that doesn't really matter as long as they get reused again. What matters is if they get just put away, but it may not be a very good collection for that time. And the relevance of collections don't always last for a great deal of time. I'm rather undermining my own position.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much for your answer. One more, another question before we will have questions from our guests and audience. Can you tell a little bit more about how the collection was managed? How many people were involved? How many curators were involved? And how the bank made decisions about purchasing of art and cooperation with artists?
Actually, that's the honest answer is it changed all the way through. So Most of the time I was there were about 25 people involved around the world. But this is for a bank with 150,000 people employed at that time, I suppose. And they were involved, as I said, actually, there were about 3,000 buildings around the world. And we'd only managed to do put art in about a third of them, so roughly 1,000. So most of our job, in a way, was administration. How do one get different buildings? Because every day in the bank, there would be a change of office, people moving, and so you have to move the art and all that. And then we also we had a policy to lend art. If an artist wanted to lend to a show, we would lend and support that. We had our program, we were sponsoring Freeze, and we were sponsoring various exhibitions. We had the Artist of the Year and a museum, like started off with the Deutsche, and now they've got the Berlin People's Palace. So yes, there were about 25 people involved doing those. For most of the time I was there, I luckily didn't get involved in the administration. And so I was really there to write about art, to talk about art, and to engage with the ideas, choose works for them. And I think that is a problem now for the museum and academic worlds, that there's often not enough freedom for curators and directors to actually spend time with art and trying to follow the changes or getting involved with them. I think I missed out. I think you had two parts of that question. And what was the other? Have I answered your question or not?
Actually, you answered my questions. Yeah.
Interestingly, at the best of times, they really had come up with a great way of selecting art, because when the system was really working well, they had this committee of 4 great global curators, including Okwi Enwezor, who was the House of Kunstmann, and he did the African shows around the world, and great, and Hu Han Ru, Nancy. We had 4 of the top curators advising that, and that was very good for keeping information coming into us. But then the actual selection process was by bank employees. So the art department, and when I was involved, it was me basically, had to explain why we thought these works should be bought by the bank. And we had to argue it to a group of a committee made up from across the bank. And we had committees from around the world. And again, there would be this interaction. And that worked really well because it was very, obviously at times one will get frustrated when one member of the committee completely misunderstood the idea, but it was part of the cleverness of the Deutsche Bank system was to take it out of the hands of the CEO. So he wasn't being shown to be arbitrarily putting things in there, and that it was actually the people involved doing it. So also when we were hanging, everyone had a choice. If you had your own office, you would take the works to them and say, we've got this, that available, which would you like? And you know, if there was a group of 500 people on the floor, they would create a committee and they would work together. So it worked very well. But at times, you know, there were changes where too senior a person got involved or something and had too big an impact, and the democratic side was lost. But you know, sometimes when the system was broken, it produced the best results. For instance, very early on when I was there, not involved in that part of the world, we had a senior account manager and not involved in the art department at all in Indonesia. And she simply went out and bought some of the best Indonesian contemporary art of the time and put it up in the office. So she broke the rules completely, but the bank actually benefited enormously. And Australia were exactly the same. So sometimes breaking rules is good.
Thank you, thank you. So now we have questions from our guests, please. No, questions. Mr. Hicks, hello.
Hello.
Thank you very much for your informative presentation. It's been so interesting to hear, and I have several questions to you. So firstly, you've been speaking about a little bit about my question just as the answer in the previous one. So I wonder, you told that it was possible to buy art from your collection by the clients or by the employees. So do you possibly have the statistics? How many percent of your art collection was bought by clients or the employees?
So, can I clarify that? You're saying how much percentage of the collection was bought by committee or what? By
clients, like just the clients of the bank, or by the employees?
We had a policy, we didn't sell to clients. I mean, over the 50 years, really, the collection's been going. There have been a few exceptions. So there are 60,000 works of art that we bought, but there was another collection, not just the young collection of works on paper was bought, supplied accounts for, say, 59,000 of that 60,000. But there was another collection which was more expensive, expressionist works and other works, and also works that had been acquired by the merging of banks. So Deutsche Bank in the 50s was the amalgamation of 12 different banks, I think. So we inherited into the collection some great things, and we even had Jelensky, Kandinsky, and great Mondrian, those sort of things. Now, when Natalia's talking about sales, that collection wasn't really part of the main collection and policy. And they have sold, and I'm not aware of percentages of how much, because even when I was working there, they were a bit neurotic. I can speak as an ex-employee quite candidly. So they were very neurotic about selling. And the reason why companies are very neurotic about selling, it's rather like if you're reading the newspaper in the morning and you're about to do a £5 billion deal with Deutsche, and you see they're selling some pictures, you think, ooh, they can't be doing very well, which of course may be true. But so it's not worth them selling something publicly that might jeopardize a major deal. So I could give you my estimates, but they would probably be way out about. But it would be still a tiny percentage of the collection.
I see. I think. And another question: as a German bank, you in the beginning of your lecture, you told that quite a big percent of your collection is by German artists. So, did you do something special to promote especially German art, or it was just like like on equals with the art from all the other parts of the country or of the world?
When they started buying in a major way, they were primarily a German bank operating, and when I say that, they were operating in the great scheme. I mean, German influence was always quite culturally quite important in quite a wide sphere of Europe, basically. So they were operating in that area, and so they were buying primarily for offices in Germany. And at that stage, they had a policy that they would buy at least 50% of the work from where the area was. So if it was in Germany, they would be buying 100% German art, but at that time. So that's why it is still a very German-based artisan. I mean, they've got fabulous. They were buying at a very good time, because if you think about it, not only the painters like Lupert and Richter and Baselitz that I was talking about, but also the photographers. So they've got Beckers, and they've got the Roof, Gursky, Candida Hofer. They were buying, it was a very good time to be buying German art. So they did very well. Nia Rausch, and I mean, they did incredibly well at that time.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you.
Okay.
Дуже дякую. Thank you. У кого ще є запитання, будь ласка? Да, давайте.
А где его встречать наконечные и смотрят ли они, в принципе, в сторону украинского?
There is a question, Alistair, about Lada Nakonichne. Where did you get this work and how you got to know her?
I went to an art fair. It was before she was represented by Eigen in Berlin. I went to an art fair in Moscow, and I saw her. Oh, I might have actually seen her in an exhibition first at one of the museums, but she wasn't known. She wasn't well known at that time. But I was reading at that time. I was very interested in Moscow conceptualism, and that's what excited me: the writing, and the writing with a little friction with the image, as it were. So yes, I came across her in Moscow, and so that's why, because I was helping the Moscow office buy works of art.
How about working with Ukrainian artists now?
Well, I would love the opportunity. At the moment, I'm not for any corporation, so I'm mainly writing and creating shows. But one never knows. I was talking to a big bank, a couple of big banks near to you, in which I was going to try and build up a collection from Eastern Europe. So I'm touting for business, basically.
I have some questions from my side.
Excellent.
So the first one, Deutsche Bank collection is very important and famous. Which other bank collections, art collections you consider important? And maybe not only banks, but corporate collections in the world. Can you say several, just name them? And second question will be, what do you think about making collections digital? For instance, one of the questions from our collector, what do you think about turning the corporate collection to say NFT?
I'll answer that first. I mean, I think digitally, I mean, one of the projects that I'd been trying to persuade Deutsche Bank to do from the start, so 25 years ago, was to use their collection as an online educational tool. And I think it's a huge potential. And another project that I'm involved in is trying to make a platform to do that for museums around the world. So I think there's huge potential for that. That is obviously the way we are going to go. Sorry, what was the first part of the question? I've got sidetracked there.
The first question was about the considerable and important other corporate collections.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the one I mentioned first was Chase, which was a very important collection. In a way, I prefer to talk about ones that I think worked in different ways. I mean, there was a company that no longer exists called Arthur Anderson that was very clever in using their art collection as a teaching tool for their staff. So they would involve lots of courses. So artists teaching people how to print, doing life classes, and doing lots of different sides. Then there was a company called TI that really used it as a marketing tool. So when they went to different countries, they would create scholarships in the art schools, in the places they wanted to do, in the sort of design areas and art areas that they thought would give them access. You can work in lots of different areas. I did a collection for the Man Booker Prize, for instance. I built up a collection of a library with art interspersed there. Of the most, there's a very interesting collection in Turkey called the Borusan collection, which is an office from Monday to Friday. It's a wonderful building on the side of the Bosphorus. Come Saturday and Sunday, all the workers have to clear their desks nicely, and it's a museum, and all the collection is there, and they use technology. It's a connection, a lot of films, a lot of technical work there. So those are a few of them. I mean, there are lots of good collections. But in a way, I think we're just at the beginning of this, and partly because, as you say, the digital, the way we're working is changing fast. So there is need for experimentation, and artists are experimenters. They lead. We had a rather dreadful advisor to our government who was involved in this wretched Brexit And but he did come up with one very interesting saying. He said that the people who actually lead our mind it's not necessarily the scientists first. It's often artists who think of the ideas first, and industry and entrepreneurs should be paying much more attention to artists, because often they're working at things way before they come into the current stream. Is that some help? Well, I probably haven't mentioned your favorite collection.
UBS Bank? You mean, or what? Okay, so Alan, and just to clarify the last question about NFT or blockchain technology, do you think that for bank collection, for corporate collection, this could be a new way of, say, sharing the collection with the public to involve bigger quantity of, to involve more people into the collection?
I would like to take up, I would like to take up where Anders left off his good talk yesterday with you. And I see the potential for using digital art or art in a digital way, so it becomes like a currency. So art becomes a currency that we associate with and becomes more, makes everyone more involved with culture, but also more involved with the life around them, because I don't see the difference between the two. And I think the virtual is just an extension of reality. I don't see them. I'm very keen on the phygital. I think each feeds off the other, and it's not an either or situation. I think there's still a lot of problems, because a lot of digital work so far has been very much led by the digital side, the technicians, at the expense of the content. And it's when the content and the technique come together. And for instance, oh no, I didn't. But one of the floors at Deutsche Bank was named after a Chinese artist called Sai Guo Chang, and I think he has already embraced the digital, and he's doing a lot of works with his fireworks. He was the man who did the fireworks for the 2008 Olympics, for instance. And his work has always been very conceptual, and he hates the art market. He can't stand. So he's always been looking for ways to go around it, which is understandable. But I think there is tremendous potential, yeah. Very exciting.
Thank you very much. We are just exactly on time. We have
Natalia, thank you to all of you there, and it's very kind. My only disappointment is that I've still got to come to Ukraine, so I hope.
Unfortunately, but I hope that probably it's a matter of half a year or maybe maximum 1 year, and soon we will see you in person in Kyiv, in Ukraine.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you very much. We are following you, and please, if you are going to have any new publications, new books, new articles, we will be happy to share.
Yeah, I've got a book out later in the year about Istanbul, artists working in Istanbul, 12 of them. It's called Istanbul.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Looking forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.